My son humiliated me at his own wedding. He stood there in his tux holding the mic calling me a man with a late-life crisis while 200 guests roared with laughter. My church brothers laughed. My cousins from Georgia slapped their knees. And I just sat there smiling like a fool while every word cut deeper than the last. They thought I was washed up a dreamer too old to matter. But what none of them knew was that the most powerful man in that room wasn't the groom or the pastor. It was me. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about family pride and justice. 2 years before that humiliating wedding, I was a 61-year-old man standing at a crossroads with a folded suit in my hands and a house that had suddenly become too quiet. My name is Clarence Harris. After 40 years in logistics, I'd finally retired, though retired wasn't a word I'd chosen. The company had reorganized, which was corporate talk for you're too old and too expensive. My wife Gloria had been gone 6 months by then. Cancer, quick, cruel, and final. For the first time in my life, I woke up without a purpose, without her morning gospel humming through the kitchen, without her soft voice reminding me to eat something before church. The silence in that house on the south side of Atlanta was heavy enough to crush bone. Malcolm came by every Sunday after service, always dressed sharp, always in a rush. He meant well, I suppose, but his visits felt more like check-ins than conversations. He'd glance at the old photos on the mantel, the ones where Gloria and I were holding him as a boy, and he'd say things like, "Dad, you've worked hard your whole life. Maybe it's time to just rest. Travel. Join one of those senior Bible study groups." The way he said it, like I was some fragile old man who needed permission to keep breathing, burned me worse than any insult. I nodded, but inside I knew I wasn't done. I could feel something restless pushing against the grief, whispering that my story wasn't over yet. I started waking up before dawn again, like I used to when I managed freight routes. I'd brew a pot of dark roast, open the blinds, and watch the neighborhood slowly wake. Kids with backpacks, church ladies sweeping porches, old friends waving from their cars. That view reminded me that the world still moved whether or not I was part of it, and I wanted to be part of it again. The problem was no one else believed I could. Not my son, not my sister Diane, not even the brothers at Mount Olive Baptist who'd known me all my life. To them, 61 meant winding down. To me it meant I finally knew what mattered. One morning after church, Pastor Lewis stopped me outside the sanctuary. "Clarence," he said, "I know it's been rough, but the Lord gives every man 2 callings, one to build and one to teach. You've built your life. Maybe now it's time to teach." His words stuck with me. Teach what logistics leadership faith I didn't know. But that night, as I sat in my old office surrounded by Gloria's photographs and a desk stacked with unpaid bills, it hit me like a flash of lightning. I could use what I knew to help smaller, struggling businesses, the kind that never got a fair shot. I didn't need a fancy office or a team, just a phone, a laptop, and my experience. So I began small. A cousin's trucking company in Decatur needed help cutting costs. I spent 2 weeks analyzing his routes, his invoices, his payroll. By the end of the month, he was saving nearly $8,000. He paid me $500 and I didn't care. It felt good to matter again. Word spread fast. A friend from church introduced me to a produce distributor in Macon. Then another man called about a warehouse in Birmingham. By summer, I had 6 steady clients. I wasn't retired anymore. I was rebuilding. Malcolm didn't take it well. He called one evening after seeing one of my invoices lying on the counter. "Dad, you can't keep doing this," he said. "You're 61. You should be enjoying your life, not chasing business deals. You don't have to prove anything." I told him I wasn't chasing money. I was chasing purpose. He sighed and said, "It's just, you sound obsessed." I wanted to tell him that obsession was what kept me alive, but I let it go. I didn't expect him to understand. He was 32, newly engaged, working in tech. Everything came easy to his generation. They thought struggle was optional. The deeper I got into the business, the more alive I felt. I spent long nights drafting contracts, drinking coffee from Gloria's old mug, whispering to her picture when I got a win. Sometimes I'd drive down Auburn Avenue just to remember what ambition used to look like, the old shops, the black-owned businesses, the men who built empires out of grit and prayer. That spirit was still in me, and I wasn't about to let it die because of a number on a birth certificate. By the end of that first year, CH Logistics Partners wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. I had partnerships with 3 regional firms and a small office downtown. I wore a suit again, not because I needed to, but because it reminded me who I was. I'd walk into those meetings with younger executives who looked at my gray hair and saw a relic, not a rival. Then I'd tear apart their systems, rebuild them in half the time, and leave them speechless. Respect came slow, but when it came, it felt righteous. At Christmas, Malcolm came by with Tanya. She noticed the business awards on my shelf and asked, "What's all this, Mr. Harris?" I smiled. "Just a few small projects." Malcolm shot me a look that said, "Let it go, Dad." So I did. I wasn't looking for validation. I was building something for myself, for Gloria, for the Harris name. But deep down I wanted him to see me as more than a retired man clinging to the past. The loneliness never fully left, but it changed shape. It wasn't grief anymore, it was drive. I stopped waiting for people to applaud. I learned to celebrate in silence. On Sundays, I still sat in the same pew at Mount Olive, nodding along to the choir, thanking God for giving me another shot at life. And every time someone whispered about how busy I still was, I just smiled. They didn't know that the old man they pitied was quietly building something big enough to shake rooms full of suits who once laughed at him. Then one evening a man named Robert Whitfield called from a tech logistics company in Atlanta. He wanted to discuss a possible acquisition deal. That call changed everything. It wasn't just business, it was the beginning of something much larger than I could have imagined. I hung up the phone, looked at Gloria's picture and said, "Baby, they don't know what's coming, because what happened next didn't just redefine my future, it rewrote how my own son would see me forever." Every Sunday after service, they'd gather at my house like clockwork, bringing peach cobbler laughter and the kind of advice nobody really asked for. My sister Diane would take over my kitchen like she still lived there, humming hymns as she rearranged my spice rack. Tanya, my son's fiancée, would sit on the couch scrolling through her phone, smiling that polite little smile that young people give when they think they're being kind to someone they've already dismissed. Clarence Diane would start, her voice sweet as honey but heavy with judgment. "You've worked all your life. Why don't you just enjoy your golden years? Stop hustling. Join the senior choir. Do some fishing. Something peaceful." Tanya would nod without looking up. "Yeah, Mr. Harris, you should take it easy. Malcolm says you're always working. You deserve to relax." They meant it as care, but it landed like pity. The kind that stings worse than disrespect because it hides behind love. I'd smile, pour them both some sweet tea, and listen to them talk about cruises and retirement plans, nodding like I agreed. But inside something boiled. They didn't see me anymore. I wasn't Clarence, the builder, the provider, the man who had pulled this family through lean years and funerals and busted transmissions. I was just an old man they pitied, a background character in their busy young lives. Every word they spoke was a gentle reminder that they thought my time had passed. Malcolm would usually show up later, loud and charming the way young men are when they know the world belongs to them. "Pop, you're still on that laptop," he'd say, glancing at the papers spread across my dining table. "Come on, man, we got the Falcons game starting. You can worry about spreadsheets later." He'd laugh, but it wasn't mean, just careless. I wanted to tell him those spreadsheets were deals worth more than his entire salary, but what would be the point? To him, I was playing business the way some folks play cards after dinner, something to fill the quiet. After they left, I'd stand at the window watching their car back out of the driveway, the taillights fading into the Georgia dusk. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was thick, like it had weight. I'd pour myself another cup of coffee and walk into my small office, walls lined with old photos of Gloria, my late wife, smiling like the world still made sense. "You hear that, baby?" I'd mutter. "Your family thinks I should be in a rocking chair." Her picture didn't answer, but the quiet gave me space to breathe. I'd open my laptop and go right back to work. The business was growing faster than I'd expected. Contracts were stacking up, phone calls coming from cities I hadn't even visited in years: Charlotte, Houston, Memphis. I was building something real, something lasting. But the more I succeeded, the lonelier it felt. Success means nothing when no one close to you believes in it. Every time I tried to share a small victory, a new client, a milestone reached, it was met with polite smiles and phrases like, "That's nice, Clarence," or "Good for you." Like I was a child showing off a drawing on the fridge. Then came the dinner that broke me a little. Diane hosted it, a big family spread at her place with Tanya and Malcolm there too. Halfway through the meal, Diane looked at me over her glass of sweet tea and said, "Clarence, honey, you gotta stop chasing work. You've done enough in this life. Maybe it's time to let go." The table went quiet for a second and Malcolm jumped in to help. "Pop, she's right. You've earned your rest. There's nothing left to prove." Tanya laughed softly. "He just likes being busy," she said. "Men always need to feel important." They all laughed together. I forced a smile, but my stomach twisted. They thought I was trying to prove something out of ego, when all I wanted was purpose. After dinner, Malcolm offered to drive me home. The ride was quiet until he said, "Dad, I hope you don't take what Diane said the wrong way. We just want you to be happy." I stared out the window at the streetlights flickering across his windshield. "You think I'm not happy?" He hesitated. "I think you're restless. Like you can't let go." I turned to him. "Maybe I'm not supposed to let go. Maybe I'm still meant to build." He didn't say anything after that. When we pulled up to my house, he hugged me goodnight, but it felt like a hug for someone already halfway gone. The next week, I skipped Sunday service for the first time in years. I drove instead to a construction site on the edge of the city where one of my clients was expanding a warehouse. The smell of fresh timber and diesel hit me like a shot of adrenaline. Young men in hard hats moved around shouting instructions, hustling like their lives depended on it. One of them, a tall kid, maybe 23, recognized me from the meetings. "Mr. Harris." "Good to see you, sir." He grinned wide. "The new system you set up saved us almost 20 grand already." I clapped him on the shoulder. "Keep working like that, son, and you'll own this company one day." His respect was quiet, genuine, the kind I hadn't felt from family in a long time. When I got home that evening, I didn't feel small anymore. I felt alive. The world outside my family still saw me as valuable. That realization hit hard. Maybe love makes people blind. My family saw my age, not my worth. They saw a past version of me, the man who had done his duty, buried his wife, paid off his debts, and was now supposed to disappear politely. But I wasn't built for disappearing. My whole life had been about moving freight-solving problems, keeping things running. That skill didn't vanish with time. It sharpened. A few weeks later, I got invited to a regional logistics conference in Nashville. I almost didn't go. It meant missing another Sunday dinner, but something in me said I needed to. That weekend changed everything. I met investors, shook hands with CEOs, and by the end of the trip, I'd signed a partnership deal that would triple my company's reach. I came home buzzing with energy, but when I told Malcolm, he barely looked up from his phone. "That's cool, Pop. Just don't overdo it." Tanya nodded like she was agreeing with a doctor. "Your blood pressure's more important than contracts." They smiled at each other, and I realized they weren't hearing a word I said. That night, I sat in my office staring at the stack of signed papers on my desk. Every signature was proof that I was still in the game, but none of it mattered if my own family thought I was chasing ghosts. I leaned back in my chair, letting the anger fade into something colder, clearer. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done seeking approval. Let them laugh, let them talk about choir practice and cruises. They'd find out soon enough who they were underestimating, because what was coming next would make even my late wife's picture smile. The deals I'd signed in Nashville were just the beginning. I was about to make a move that would shake this family to its core, and no sermon, no Sunday dinner was going to prepare them for it. I built my empire in silence. The basement became my war room, the hum of the old computer my choir. Every morning before the sun had a chance to rise over Atlanta, I'd sit there with a cup of coffee and a notepad running numbers, drafting proposals, and sending cold emails until my fingers cramped. The world upstairs thought I was just another lonely retiree tinkering with his old laptop. But down there in that cramped space with concrete walls and a single flickering bulb, I was designing something that would outlive me. I called it CH Logistics Partners. A name simple enough to be overlooked, yet solid enough to carry weight. At first it was just me, a printer that jammed every other page, and the ghost of my wife's encouragement whispering in the back of my mind. I started reaching out to small Black-owned trucking and supply businesses, the kind that worked twice as hard to get half the contracts. I knew their struggle because I'd lived it for decades. Every time a corporate door shut in their faces, I remembered the same door slamming in mine. So I started opening a few for them. I offered free advice at first route optimization, contract negotiation, budgeting, things they could never afford consultants for. I didn't have to tell anyone. I just worked day and night until those small favors became invoices, and those invoices turned into a living. Within a year, I had a client in every southern state. The money wasn't massive, but the satisfaction was. Each handshake, each. Thank you. Mr. Harris reminded me that God wasn't finished with me yet. I'd sit on my porch some evenings with a glass of iced tea and think about Gloria, about how proud she would have been to see me rebuild from nothing but faith and stubbornness. But silence has its price. My family still didn't see me for who I was becoming. To them, I was wasting time. Diane would drop by carrying casseroles I never asked for and ask how the little project was going. Tanya once called it Dad's cute business experiment. I smiled through it all. I didn't need validation. I needed results. Still, their condescension cut deep. The more they doubted, the harder I worked. I took their laughter and turned it into fuel. Some nights I'd leave the basement and walk through the neighborhood. The smell of barbecue from the corner house, the faint rhythm of gospel music from a passing car. It all grounded me. Atlanta had its own pulse, and I wanted my name beating in rhythm with it. One evening, I met a young driver named Reggie, who ran a 2-truck delivery outfit but was on the verge of losing it all. I helped him restructure his contracts, found him a reliable supplier, and within months, he was turning profit. Reggie brought me others. Soon I wasn't just consulting. I was building a network, a quiet movement of men and women who refused to be invisible. I rented a small office downtown. Nothing fancy, just a single window facing Peachtree Street. I hired a young assistant named Naomi, a brilliant kid from Clark Atlanta University, who reminded me of my younger self, hungry, sharp, too ambitious to sit still. She brought fresh energy into the operation. She'd say, "Mr. Harris, we're growing faster than our Wi-Fi." I'd laugh and tell her to call the provider again. Those were good days. We signed contracts with mid-level distributors, warehousing chains, even a construction firm out of Montgomery. But what truly changed everything was the call I got one rainy Thursday evening. A representative from Whitfield & Sons, a major logistics player out of Dallas, had heard about my firm. He wanted to meet. "Your company came highly recommended," he said. I looked around my office, the water stain on the ceiling, the buzzing fluorescent light, Naomi sorting through paperwork, and I almost laughed. We weren't a company. We were barely a team. But I said yes. I spent that night preparing like a soldier before battle. I reprinted my contracts, polished my shoes, and even took out Gloria's old handkerchief, pressing it flat into my pocket for luck. The next morning I met the Whitfield rep at a diner near the airport. He was younger than I expected, early 40s, confident in that corporate way, expensive watch, over-rehearsed smile. He leaned forward and said, "Mr. Harris, we're looking for regional partners who know how to handle real operations. Not theory execution." Your name came up more than once. I listened calm, but inside I was grinning. All those nights in the basement had led to this moment. By the end of that breakfast, I had landed a contract that would triple my firm's annual revenue. I drove home in the rain with gospel playing low on the radio, the city lights blurring in the windshield. I could almost hear Gloria's voice. "Keep your faith steady, Clarence. God's timing is perfect." I believe that more than ever. The following Sunday, I sat through church service nodding as the choir sang about divine purpose. And when Pastor Lewis preached about how the Lord rewards those who labor in silence, I felt every word like it was meant for me. Still, I told no one. Not Diane, not Malcolm, not Tanya. I let them keep thinking I was wasting my retirement. There was something satisfying about it, watching them underestimate me while I built an empire right under their noses. It was more than pride. It was patience. The kind of patience you learn from years of being ignored. But something was shifting. Malcolm started dropping by my office more often, pretending it was casual, asking questions that didn't sound casual at all. "So, Pop, how's that little logistics thing doing? You got real clients or just small gigs?" I'd shrug, play dumb, and change the subject. I wanted him to learn about my success the hard way, through shock. Then Naomi called me one morning, excitement cracking through her voice. "Mr. Harris, we've just been invited to a national supply chain conference in Houston. They want you to speak about minority-owned operations." I froze for a second. A year ago, nobody would return my calls. Now they wanted to hear me speak. That night I ironed my best suit, the same navy one I wore to Malcolm's high school graduation. I stood in front of the mirror, older, yes, but sharper, wiser, alive. The reflection looking back at me wasn't a retired man. It was a builder, reborn. The next day, as I walked into that conference hall with hundreds of executives turning their heads, I realized something. Silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. Let them talk while you build. Let them laugh while you plan. Then let your results speak so loud they drown out every doubt. And I knew right then the quiet storm I'd started in my basement was about to thunder in places none of them ever imagined. It started with one sentence. "Dad, don't talk about your business at the wedding." Malcolm said it like he was asking for a favor, but I could hear what he really meant. He didn't want me to embarrass him. He wanted me to stay quiet, sit in the corner, and play the role of the harmless old man who'd already lived his life. The words didn't just sting, they sliced. It wasn't the first time my son had underestimated me, but it was the first time he said it out loud. We were sitting in his living room in Buckhead, Tanya nearby, flipping through a binder of floral arrangements, the kind of glossy wedding magazine that costs more than a month's rent. Malcolm looked sharp in his button-down and gold watch, confident, polished, the way I used to be before time and grief weathered me. "Dad, Tanya's family is. You know, they're very traditional. Her father runs a law firm, her mother's on the church board. Let's just keep things simple." "Okay," he said, glancing at Tanya like he was seeking approval. She smiled politely, one of those smiles that doesn't reach the eyes. "Of course, Mr. Harris, we want you to enjoy the day, not worry about business." I forced a laugh. "Business is part of my life, sweetheart. I talk about it the same way y'all talk about your wedding colors." She giggled, but I saw the exchange of looks between them. That look couples give when they silently agree on something. The message was clear. I was the joke they were trying not to make out loud. On the drive home, Atlanta's skyline glowed through the windshield, but all I could think about was how small my own son had just made me feel. He wasn't that little boy who used to sit in the passenger seat asking questions about the world anymore. He was a man now, and I was just background noise. Somewhere along the way, respect had turned into politeness, and politeness had turned into dismissal. I spent that night pacing the house, trying to shake off the anger. I wasn't mad at his words. I was mad at what they revealed. I'd raised a son who measured worth by status, who thought a man's voice faded with age. And maybe it was partly my fault. I'd been too busy working, too focused on providing, not teaching. But the more I thought about it, the more a fire started building in me. I had spent decades earning the right to be heard. I wasn't about to let my own child turn me into a relic at his wedding. The next morning, I went down to my office, my sanctuary, my basement, and stared at the CH Logistics logo printed on my contracts. Those papers represented more than money. They were proof that I still mattered. Every line, every signature was a statement of survival. While they saw a man past his prime, I saw a man just hitting his stride. Still, the disrespect kept growing. Every call about the wedding came with another small insult wrapped in sugar. Dad, Tanya's parents want to cover the main catering bill. You've done enough. Or, we're keeping speeches short this time. Maybe just a blessing from you instead of a full toast. A blessing. That was all they wanted from me. The man who paid for the venue, the tuxedos, the flowers reduced to a few seconds of polite gratitude, before they moved on to champagne and dancing. At first I thought about refusing to go, but then I realized something. Sometimes the best revenge isn't walking away, it's showing up, looking them dead in the eye and letting them see what they threw away. The week before the wedding, Tanya's father invited me to lunch. I could tell it was out of obligation, not respect. He chose an upscale restaurant in Midtown, the kind where the waiters don't smile, and the plates look like art. He shook my hand like it was a business transaction. Clarence, I hear you've been keeping busy with consulting, he said, that faint condescension dripping from his tone. Good to see you staying active. Retirement can be hard for men like us. I smiled back. Oh, I'm not retired. I'm expanding. He chuckled politely, clearly not believing a word. Of course. It's nice to have a hobby. I looked him square in the eyes. A hobby Mr. Whitfield doesn't sign million-dollar contracts. His smile froze. For the rest of that lunch he talked less, and I left the restaurant knowing something he didn't. By the time the wedding happened, his company would already be working under one of my subsidiaries. When the day finally came, I put on my suit navy crisp, perfectly pressed, and stared at myself in the mirror. 63 years old, silver at the temples, eyes sharp. Gloria's photo sat on the dresser beside me. You'd tell me to let it go, I said softly. But I can't. Not this time. At the church, everything gleamed: white flowers, gold ribbons, a gospel choir humming softly as guests filled the pews. Tanya's family looked proud, polished, perfect. My family, oblivious. I took my seat near the front, nodding at people who smiled at me without really seeing me. When Malcolm walked down the aisle, he didn't look my way. He was glowing proud, living his moment. I watched him and felt something twist inside me, not jealousy but disappointment. I wanted to feel proud, but instead I felt erased. At the reception, I tried to stay invisible. I talked with a few guests, avoided the microphone, kept to myself. But fate has a cruel sense of humor. Midway through dinner, Malcolm took the mic for his speech. I want to thank everyone for coming, he said, smiling. Especially my father, who's been, well, let's just say busier than ever these days. The room laughed. He's always got a new project going, trying to be a big-time businessman. Laughter rippled again. My chest tightened, but I kept my smile fixed. I looked around the room, Tanya's parents laughing, my sister hiding a grin, even the pastor shaking his head in amusement. To them, I was a punchline. I sipped my drink slowly, letting the humiliation sink in until it turned cold. They wanted humble fine. I'd give them silence now, but not for long. Because what they didn't know, what not one person in that room suspected, was that the man they were laughing at already owned a piece of their future. By the time the champagne glasses were cleared, my company's contracts would have the Whitfield firm's signature on them. The same firm that employed Tanya's father. The same one that had just landed a deal with CH Logistics Partners. I smiled, then not out of pride, but out of understanding. They had mistaken silence for weakness, humility for surrender. But this wasn't surrender, it was strategy. I could feel it building inside me, a calm before the storm. What none of them realized was that the storm had already started, and before the night was over, every person in that glittering hall would learn exactly who they had just laughed at. The laughter was deafening. Golden light spilled over the tables like honey music floated through the air, and somewhere in between champagne glasses clinking and heels clicking on the dance floor, I heard my own son make me the punchline. "My dad's building his retirement empire," Malcolm said into the microphone voice, smooth, full of charm. "Man's always got a new project one day. It's trucking next day, it's logistics, maybe next week he'll start a record label." The crowd roared. His best man chimed in, "That's right, Mr. Hustle Forever." Even the preacher laughed, his deep voice echoing through the room. I sat there with a smile frozen on my face, nodding like it was all in good fun, while inside my chest burned like someone had lit a match behind my ribs. I could feel my heart pounding against my shirt collar, every beat reminding me that I didn't belong here, not as they saw me anyway. I wasn't the respected father of the groom. I was a story they told to get a laugh. My fingers tightened around the stem of my glass until I thought it might shatter. The faces around me blurred under the glow of chandeliers, Tanya's family polished and smiling, my sister Diane whispering something that made her snicker, even a few of my church friends chuckling behind napkins. It was like watching respect evaporate in real time. I turned my gaze toward the head table. Malcolm's smile was wide, radiant, confident. He looked happy. I should have been proud of that. I wanted to be. But pride is hard to summon when your own child uses you as a prop. I caught Tanya's eyes for a second. She smiled at me, polite, distant, the kind of smile that says, "Don't take it personal." I did. Every word, every laugh, every glance. The band started up again, a lively tune, and people clapped along. The air smelled of roasted chicken perfume and expensive wine. I stared at the tablecloth, tracing the embroidery with my thumb to keep my hands steady. "You good, Mr. Harris?" asked one of Tanya's uncles sitting beside me, voice casual, unaware of the storm inside me. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "Yeah," I managed. "Just proud of my boy." The lie rolled off my tongue with the ease of a man who'd had a lifetime of practice pretending things didn't hurt. When the dinner ended, I excused myself and walked out onto the balcony. The city lights glittered below like a sea of diamonds, and the faint thump of music pulsed through the walls behind me. I loosened my tie and inhaled the cool air, trying to calm the fury beneath my calm. I could still hear their laughter echoing, could still see the pity in some of their eyes. He's trying, they probably thought. At least he's still active. Active, like I was some old machine refusing to stop working. A waiter passed by offering me another drink. I waved him off. I didn't need alcohol. I needed clarity. I gripped the balcony rail, knuckles whitening, and whispered under my breath, "Not tonight. Not here." I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I'd learned long ago that dignity isn't given, it's held. Sometimes by nothing but sheer force of will. Inside, I heard the DJ announce the father-son dance. My chest tightened again. For a second, I considered leaving, just walking out and letting them dance without me. But then I heard Tanya's voice call Mr. Harris. "Come on, it's your moment. My moment." That was rich. I walked back in the room, spinning slightly from heat and humiliation. Malcolm stood there, smiling, hand out like nothing had happened. "Come on, Pop," he said. "Don't leave me hanging." I took his hand. The music started, an old soul tune I used to play in the car when he was a boy. The crowd clapped softly, sentimental smiles replacing their laughter. I moved with him slowly, keeping my expression calm. "You really had to roast me tonight, huh?" I said quietly. His grin faltered for a second. "It was just a joke, Dad." "Lighten up." "Lighten up," I repeated. "You turned me into entertainment for people who don't even know me." He shrugged. "You take things too seriously." Everyone was laughing. It was fun. I looked him dead in the eye. Not for me. He dropped his gaze, uncomfortable, and the music carried us through the rest of the dance in silence. I could feel the eyes of the guests watching, the weight of every whisper pressing on my shoulders. When the song ended, I stepped back, patted him on the shoulder, and walked away before the applause could start. Back at my table, I found my seat empty. Someone had taken my glass. Perfect, I thought. Even my drink had been replaced. I looked around at the people dancing, the lights flickering across their smiling faces. And that's when it hit me. None of this was for me. It never had been. I'd paid for the food, the flowers, the music, even the tuxedos, but in that room I was invisible. The father of the groom wasn't a man to be honored. He was just a wallet with a seat at the table. I sat there for a while, pretending to watch the dancing, but my mind was far away. I thought about all the years I'd worked to build something from nothing. The nights Gloria would stay up waiting for me, the times I'd missed dinners and birthdays so that Malcolm could have everything he wanted. All of that, and now I was just a punchline, a man past his prime. Then I saw him talking to Tanya's father across the room. They were laughing again. Tanya's father clapped him on the back and said something that made them both smile. That's when I noticed the papers in the older man's hand, a contract folder branded with the Whitfield logo. My pulse quickened. Whitfield & Sons. The same company that had signed with CH Logistics Partners 2 weeks ago. My company. My deal. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile forming. They were laughing at me without realizing that half the room depended on me. The irony tasted sweet. The preacher raised his glass for a toast, and the clinking of crystal filled the air. I stood quietly, nodded to no one in particular, and slipped away again. Outside, the night was cool, the hum of traffic steady. I loosened my tie completely and let the air wash over me. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is loud. What I felt was quieter, sharper, a calm that cuts. Inside, they were still laughing, dancing blind to the fact that the man they'd just mocked held the strings to their future. I watched the lights flicker in the ballroom windows and whispered to myself, let them laugh. Tomorrow, the world they built on pride will start to shift, and they won't even know why. Because the deal I'd signed wasn't just business, it was leverage. And soon, the same people clinking glasses inside that hall would be coming to me with smiles that didn't come from laughter, but from necessity. The fire in my chest cooled into something colder, steadier. I straightened my suit, turned toward the parking lot, and walked away from the building without looking back. They could have their night. I already had the next move. I was halfway to the door when I heard my name slice through the noise like a bullet. Wait, did you say Clarence Harris? The voice carried authority, curiosity, and just enough disbelief to make every head turn. I stopped cold, my hand resting on the doorframe. Tanya's boss, Mr. Whitfield, stood near the head table, a glass of champagne trembling slightly in his hand. His sharp suit caught the light, but his expression was what caught me shock, the kind that cracks the mask of corporate confidence. You're Clarence Harris, as in CH Logistics Partners. I turned slowly, keeping my face calm even as my pulse thundered in my ears. Yes, sir, I said, my voice steady. That's me. For a moment, the entire room froze. The laughter that had filled the hall minutes ago vanished like smoke. Even the band stopped mid-note. Mr. Whitfield blinked, his jaw tightening as he tried to process it. Sir, he said, his tone shifting from casual to reverent. Our firm just finalized a contract with CH Logistics last quarter. A multi-million-dollar deal. You're that Mr. Harris. A ripple of silence swept through the tables. Forks hovered mid-air, glasses paused inches from lips. Tanya's smile collapsed. Malcolm's face drained of color. It was like someone had flipped a switch, turning the room from warmth to ice in a heartbeat. Every eye turned toward me, some confused, some shocked, some already beginning to calculate what this meant. Yes, I said quietly, taking a step closer, my voice carrying through the stunned silence. That's the company I founded. We've been partners with Whitfield & Sons for about 3 months now. Fine folks to work with. Mr. Whitfield's face lit up with the kind of respect money can't buy. He set his glass down and reached out his hand. Well, sir, it's an honor. You're one of the few independent contractors making real moves in this market. I didn't realize we were in the presence of the man himself. He turned to the guests, his voice booming, now reclaiming the microphone Malcolm had been holding minutes earlier. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we owe this man a round of applause. Mr. Harris isn't chasing a dream, he's leading an industry. The crowd erupted, not with laughter this time, but with applause, slow at first, hesitant, then growing louder, stronger, rolling through the room like thunder. I didn't move. I just stood there, hands in my pockets, letting the sound wash over me. For the first time all night, I felt the weight lift from my chest. Malcolm's eyes darted between me and Whitfield, confusion turning to realization, realization to regret. I could see the moment it hit him, the truth crashing through whatever illusion he'd built about who his father was. He tried to smile, but it came out shaky. Tanya's hand slipped from his arm. She looked down, her face pale, her confidence shattered. Mr. Whitfield, oblivious to the tension unraveling behind him, continued talking. I had no idea this was your father, Malcolm. You never mentioned it. The question in his tone cut deeper than any insult. The room went still again, waiting for my son's response. Malcolm cleared his throat, his voice cracking slightly. I didn't think it was relevant, he stammered. Whitfield frowned. Not relevant, Sir C.H. Logistics is the backbone of half our new operations. The contracts your father manages are the reason we're expanding in the first place. He turned to me again, admiration shining in his eyes. You've built something incredible, Mr. Harris. Most people half your age couldn't keep up. The applause returned this time, genuine, reverent. I nodded once, acknowledging it with quiet dignity. Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. We're just getting started. Inside, though, I wasn't smiling. I was steady, measured, watching my son shrink under the weight of the revelation he'd never seen coming. Every dismissive word, every laugh, every look of pity from earlier replayed in my head, but I didn't need to gloat. The truth was louder than anything I could have said. Whitfield raised his glass toward me. To Mr. Harris, he announced, his voice full of admiration. A man who proves that purpose doesn't retire. The guests joined in, glasses, clinking, voices echoing. To Mr. Harris. The sound filled the hall again, but this time it wasn't mockery, it was respect. And yet, amid the cheers, I saw Malcolm's face, pale, tight, lost. He wasn't clapping, he was staring at me like he was seeing a stranger. I walked toward him slowly, the crowd parting as I moved. He swallowed hard when I stopped in front of him. Dad, he whispered, barely audible. I didn't know. No, I said softly. You didn't want to know. His eyes glistened, but no tears fell. Tanya looked between us, realizing she was standing on the wrong side of a moment that would haunt her forever. Her father, still frozen at the head table, had gone quiet, his expression unreadable, but clearly shaken by what this meant. Whitfield leaned in again, unbothered by the tension. Mr. Harris, we should talk soon. There's potential for expansion. Your company has the precision and reliability we need on a national scale. I'll have my assistant set up a meeting. I smiled faintly. I'll look forward to it. As Whitfield moved off to greet other guests, the band started up again, softer this time, unsure of the tone. Conversations picked back up, but the energy had shifted completely. I could feel it in the way people glanced at me now, with awe instead of dismissal, with curiosity instead of pity. The same mouths that had laughed at me an hour earlier were whispering my name like it carried weight. I turned to leave again, this time with no hesitation. The applause had faded, the music filled the air, but my focus was on the door and the night beyond it. I could feel Malcolm's eyes on my back, the silence between us, stretching like a bridge he wasn't ready to cross. As I stepped into the cool night, I caught my reflection in the glass doors. Tired eyes, silver hair, and a steady expression that no longer carried the ache of being underestimated. That night, under chandeliers and hollow laughter, they had tried to make me small. Instead, they'd made me visible. I exhaled slowly, the city lights flickering against the hood of my car, and thought about how life has a way of flipping the script when you least expect it. The son who silenced me had just been silenced himself. The man who laughed the loudest was now hiding behind his champagne glass. And the father who was told to stay humble had just been handed the microphone of destiny without saying a single word. But that wasn't the end of the story. What came after the phone calls, the deals, the choices that would define what kind of man I'd be next, none of them were ready for that part. And I was just getting started. Mr. Whitfield didn't hesitate. He set his champagne flute down, adjusted his cufflinks, and strode toward the microphone with the steady confidence of a man who knew exactly what kind of silence he was about to command. The crowd quieted almost instantly, as if the air itself had paused to listen. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice smooth but sharp enough to cut through the room's thick tension. "I believe we've all been laughing at the wrong man tonight." Every conversation stopped. Even the clinking of silverware went dead. I could feel 200 pairs of eyes shift from him to me. Whitfield turned slightly, extending a hand toward where I stood near the edge of the dance floor. "Mr. Harris isn't chasing a dream," he said, his voice rising. "He's the man who built one. Half the companies represented in this room operate under his contracts, including mine." For a beat there was only silence. Then the sound of gasps rippled through the hall. Forks dropped against porcelain plates. Champagne flutes froze halfway to lips. Even Pastor Lewis, who'd spent the evening smiling politely through every joke, looked like someone had just yanked the floor out from under him. Tanya's father blinked, his expression twisting from arrogance to disbelief. Tanya herself looked like she'd forgotten how to breathe. Malcolm stood there, frozen beside her, the groom's smile gone, replaced by something raw and unfamiliar. Shame. Whitfield wasn't done. He leaned into the mic, his tone now reverent. "I've met plenty of businessmen in this city, but few with Mr. Harris's integrity, resilience, and vision. When my company was negotiating logistics expansion last quarter, CH. Logistics delivered what no one else could: results. Quiet results. Steady results. The kind that make real change." Applause began hesitantly, one or two people at first, then spreading like a wave. The sound filled the room. The same room that had laughed at me not half an hour earlier. I didn't move. I just stood there, my back straight, hands folded in front of me, every muscle still and deliberate. I wasn't going to gloat. I didn't need to. The truth was doing all the talking. Whitfield motioned toward me again. "So let's give this man the respect he's earned," he said, raising his glass. "To Mr. Harris, a reminder that purpose doesn't retire, and that quiet work speaks louder than loud pride." The applause grew louder, rising into a roar. People stood. Some cheered. Others whispered apologies under their breath, though none dared to meet my eyes. Even the band clapped. It was the sound of redemption, not because I needed validation, but because every laugh, every smirk, every whispered "poor old man" had just turned into an ovation. Malcolm's best man, the same one who'd called me Mr. Hustle forever, looked down at his plate, red-faced. "Diane." My sister was frozen mid-bite, her mouth open but empty of words. Tanya tried to smile, but it came out brittle, cracking at the corners. And Malcolm, my son, stood motionless, his hands limp at his sides, eyes searching mine like he was trying to find the father he'd forgotten. When Whitfield stepped away from the mic, people surged forward. Executives I'd never met shook my hand, calling me sir, now their voices dripping with sudden respect. A man from a shipping firm introduced himself eagerly, saying, "We'd love to discuss partnership opportunities." Another woman from a rival logistics company slipped me her card. "You've built something special, Mr. Harris," she said, eyes wide. All I could think about was how hollow their praise sounded. Not because it wasn't deserved, but because it had taken one public revelation for them to see what had been in front of them all along. I turned my attention back to my son. He still hadn't moved. The applause was fading, replaced by murmurs, the sound of people adjusting to a new hierarchy they didn't know existed until 5 minutes ago. I walked toward Malcolm slowly, each step deliberate, the echo of my shoes cutting through the noise. When I reached him, he tried to speak, but nothing came out. "Dad, I raised a hand. "You don't have to say anything." My voice was calm even. "You just listen now." He swallowed hard, guilt flickering across his face. Around us, the music picked up again, tentative, like the band was afraid to disturb whatever moment this was. Every man reaches a point, I said quietly, where he learns the difference between being seen and being respected. Tonight you saw that difference. You wanted me small so you could feel bigger, but I never stopped being the man who built everything you're standing on. He nodded slowly, eyes glassy. I'm sorry, he whispered. I know I said my voice soft, but cutting through the noise anyway. But respect isn't given. It's earned. And sometimes it's taught. Tanya touched his arm, but he didn't look at her. The weight between us was heavier than any sermon, thicker than any apology. Mr. Whitfield approached again, smiling. Mr. Harris, I'd like to set up a meeting this week, he said. We're looking to expand our East Coast operations. You'd be the perfect partner. I nodded. We'll talk. He grinned and clapped me on the shoulder before turning back to the crowd. More people approached, each one with the same eager expression, the same rehearsed admiration. I shook hands, smiled when I had to, but my mind wasn't on them. It was on Malcolm, still standing there, still quiet, still humbled. The evening blurred after that. Toasts were made, deals hinted at, and the laughter that once mocked me now sounded desperate to be near me. But I'd heard enough laughter for one night. I slipped away toward the back of the room, out through a side door that led to the patio. The air outside was cool, the kind that wakes you up after being too long under bright lights and false smiles. I leaned against the railing, watching the city glitter below. The sound of applause still faintly drifted through the walls behind me, but it felt far away now, like it belonged to someone else. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. What I felt was something cleaner, sharper, peace laced with power. The night that began with humiliation had ended with revelation, and the very people who'd laughed at my supposed late-life crisis were now desperate to be part of my story. I looked back through the glass doors at the crowd still milling around my son's wedding and realized something I hadn't before. Sometimes God doesn't silence your enemies. He makes them your audience. And this show wasn't over yet, because what came after that night would shake more than just one wedding hall. It would change everything they thought they knew about who I was and who I was about to become. Malcolm's face drained of color, like someone had pulled the light straight out of him. The confident grin he'd worn all evening had vanished, replaced by something small, something scared. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. Dad, I didn't know. The words came out like an apology he didn't know how to finish. I studied him for a long moment, the room fading until it was just us, father and son, standing in the wreckage of everything unspoken. You didn't want to know, I said quietly. You were too busy laughing. The gospel band had started playing again, something slow, almost mournful. It filled the silence like a confession. People were pretending to talk again, but their eyes were still on us. The same guests who had laughed minutes ago now sat frozen, caught between discomfort and guilt. Even the air felt heavy. I looked at my son, his jaw trembling, his hands twitching like he wanted to reach for me, but didn't know if he was allowed to anymore. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Tanya whispered his name, but he didn't answer. He just kept staring at me, searching for the man he'd buried under his own arrogance. And in that moment I realized he wasn't angry. He was ashamed. Not just for the jokes, but for every time he'd made me smaller to make himself feel bigger. I should have been satisfied. This was the moment every humiliated man dreams of, the tables turned, the pride restored. But all I felt was tired. The kind of tired that seeps into your bones after years of being misunderstood by someone you love too much to fight. He took a step toward me. Dad, please. I didn't mean to disrespect you. I was just what I asked. My voice was low, steady, but it cut through the noise like a blade. Trying to impress them, trying to prove you'd outgrown me. His eyes welled up and he looked down. I thought I had to. I thought... People wouldn't take me seriously if they saw you still hustling at your age. I nodded slowly. And now you see what that hustle built. The words hit him harder than any slap. He looked like he wanted to collapse right there. Tanya tried to speak up, but I turned my gaze on her and she fell silent. The music swelled behind us, the choir's voices melting into the soft hum of a saxophone. The room looked the same, but everything had shifted. I reached for my glass more to give my hands something to do than out of thirst. The ice clinked softly against the rim, the sound sharp in the hush. You know, I said when your mother passed, I promised myself I'd never let this family lose its name. I worked not because I needed money, but because I needed meaning. But somewhere along the way you stopped seeing me as a man and started seeing me as a burden. He lifted his head, tears glistening now. That's not true. It is, I said. But it's all right. You're not the first to forget who lifted you up, and you won't be the last. A tremor went through his lips. He whispered, I'm sorry. I believed him. The apology was raw, stripped of ego. But forgiveness isn't something you hand out in the middle of a ballroom full of strangers. It's something you grow into, slow and painful like scar tissue. I set the glass down and took a deep breath. You've got a good heart, Malcolm. You just let pride get too loud. He nodded, wiping his face with the back of his hand, the movement awkward, boyish, vulnerable. For a split second I saw him as a child again, the kid who used to run through the house barefoot, shouting for me to watch him jump off the porch. That same spark was still there, buried under years of distance and misunderstanding. Whitfield came over, hand on my shoulder, murmuring something about setting up a meeting next week, but I barely heard him. My focus stayed on Malcolm. You know, I said, my tone softening. There was a time when I thought I'd failed you. When you stopped calling, when you stopped asking me for advice, I figured maybe I'd done something wrong as a father. But standing here now, I realize you just had to lose your way before you could find it again. His eyes filled again, and this time he didn't fight it. I don't deserve your forgiveness, he said quietly. Maybe not yet, I replied. But one day you will. And when that day comes, I hope you'll remember this moment not for the shame, but for the truth it showed you. The gospel tune shifted to something brighter, hopeful even. People began talking again, relief trickling through the tension. The laughter returned, smaller this time, gentler. But I stayed still. I wasn't ready to move on, not yet. Tanya excused herself, probably to collect herself, leaving Malcolm and me standing there under the golden lights that had mocked me earlier. He finally spoke again. Dad. What happens now? I smiled faintly. Now, you go dance with your wife. You smile, you thank your guests. You remember that tonight is still your wedding. And me, I'll head home soon. I've got work to do in the morning. His mouth opened to argue, but I held up a hand. Don't. You know it's true. There's always work to be done. He let out a small broken laugh. Still the same old you? No, I said, my eyes locking with his. Just the version you stopped seeing. He nodded again, and I could tell he wanted to hug me to bridge the gap between us, but pride still had its grip. I didn't push it. Some things have to heal in silence. The night wound down. Guests filtered out, whispering my name as they passed, half in awe, half in guilt. I shook hands, accepted compliments, and even laughed once or twice. But when I finally stepped outside, the cool air hit me like a baptism. I loosened my tie, letting the tension drain from my shoulders. Behind me, through the glass doors, I saw Malcolm dancing slowly with Tanya, his eyes finding mine across the room. He lifted his glass slightly, a quiet salute, a peace offering. I nodded back. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. The city hummed beyond the parking lot, alive and restless. I stood there for a long time, watching the lights blur into the night. Somewhere in the distance, a choir's faint melody floated from another celebration, and it made me smile. The pain of the evening hadn't vanished. It lingered like an ache you learn to live with. But underneath it, something else had begun to grow, a strange kind of peace. The kind that comes from knowing that even when love falters, it still finds its way home. And I knew deep down that this wasn't the end of our story. It was the moment the real work began. Months passed, and the noise from that wedding faded into something distant, almost cinematic, like a scene you remember but don't quite feel anymore. The sting had gone, replaced by something quieter, steadier. Life had shifted in small, deliberate ways. I could tell by the sound of my Sunday mornings, no longer silent, no longer lonely. It started the first Sunday after service. I was in my office running numbers for a new contract out of Charlotte when I heard a knock. 3 short raps, hesitant. I knew that rhythm. When I opened the door, Malcolm was standing there in his church suit holding 2 coffees. "Thought you might like one," he said, his voice careful, almost shy. I stared at him for a moment before taking it. "You remembered how I like it?" I asked. He nodded. "Black, no sugar." He walked in slowly, eyes scanning the space. It wasn't his first time seeing my office, but it was the first time he was really seeing it. The awards, the framed contracts, the picture of Gloria on my desk. The world he had once dismissed as a hobby now felt heavier to him, more real. "I didn't realize how much you'd built," he said, touching one of the plaques on the wall. "I should have." He stopped himself and sat down instead. "I've been working on a new project at my firm. I was wondering if you could take a look." It was his way of apologizing, of asking for more than forgiveness, of asking to learn. From that day on, it became a ritual. Every Sunday after church, Malcolm would show up with coffee, sometimes with a notebook, sometimes with nothing but questions. We'd talk about business, but we'd also talk about life. The kind of conversations we'd missed for years. At first he listened more than he spoke, humbled by his own ignorance. Over time he began to contribute ideas, sharp ones. I saw in him flashes of myself, the hunger, the instinct, the quiet fire. It made me proud in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. Tanya came around too, though it took her longer. She started by sending polite text messages thanking me for helping Malcolm grow professionally. Then one afternoon she showed up in person, dressed sharp as always, carrying a folder. "Mr. Harris," she said with genuine warmth in her tone, "I wanted to talk about a possible collaboration between my company and yours." She used my name differently now, no longer with the polite distance of a woman tolerating an elder, but with respect, with recognition. I didn't say yes right away. I just smiled and invited her to sit. We talked business, but beneath the spreadsheets and terms, there was something unspoken. She knew what that meeting really was, a gesture of reconciliation, an acknowledgement of what she and Malcolm had failed to see. When she left, she shook my hand firmly, and for the first time I believed she meant it when she said, "It's an honor, Mr. Harris." CH Logistics kept growing. Contracts expanded, the team tripled, and Naomi, my assistant, was now leading operations across 3 states. She liked to tease me about slowing down, but I wasn't done yet. I'd always believed in building not just for profit, but for purpose. Legacy work, I called it, something that would stand when I couldn't. Malcolm began bringing his friends and colleagues by the office. "Dad, meet Andre," he'd say. "He's been trying to launch his own firm." Or, "Dad, could you explain to my team how you manage supply scaling without losing margins?" The irony wasn't lost on me. These were the same types who once laughed at me over dinner tables and wedding speeches. Now they leaned in, listening, taking notes like students at a sermon. And I never gloated, not once. I didn't need to. The satisfaction wasn't in their repentance. It was in the quiet understanding that I had never needed their approval to begin with. One Sunday evening, as the sun set behind the Atlanta skyline, Malcolm lingered after everyone had left. He stood by the window, watching the light spill across the desk. "You know," he said, "I used to think success meant proving something to people, being better, richer, louder. But now," he looked at me, eyes softer than I'd ever seen them, "now I see it's about building something that matters." "You did that, Dad." I leaned back in my chair, smiling faintly. "Took you long enough to figure it out." He laughed quietly, shaking his head. "You think Mom would be proud?" "She always was," I said, "even when neither of us knew what we were doing." He nodded, and the silence that followed was comfortable this time. It wasn't filled with regret or pride, just understanding, the kind that takes years to earn. When he finally left, I stayed behind, turning off the office lights one by one. The glow from Gloria's photo lingered in the dim room. I sat for a moment longer, listening to the hum of the city outside, the distant horns, the rhythm of life that never quite stops. It reminded me of the sound in that wedding hall, the gospel band playing after the laughter had died. Back then it had felt like humiliation. Now it felt like prophecy. People think redemption comes in grand gestures, but it doesn't. It comes in the quiet mornings, the shared coffee, the conversations that heal old wounds without naming them. It comes in the steady hum of work well done and the peace that follows when you finally stop needing to be seen. I didn't build CH Logistics to prove anyone wrong. I built it to remind myself that calling doesn't expire with age, that faith doesn't fade just because the world stops clapping. And if that reminded a few people along the way what real legacy looks like, that was just God's way of tying the bow. Sometimes I still drive past that wedding venue. The lights are different now, the signs changed, but the memory remains. I park across the street, roll the window down, and listen to the city hum. It doesn't hurt anymore. It just reminds me how far I've come. Respect isn't something you demand, it's something you become. And the sweetest part of all, when it finally finds its way back to you, you don't have to say a word. The world already knows. Life has a way of humbling us before it teaches us. This story reminds us that respect isn't given because of youth money or titles, it's earned through integrity, persistence, and grace under pressure. For many of us who've lived long enough to see both success and failure, it's easy to feel overlooked or underestimated. But the truth is, age isn't a limitation. It's an advantage. Wisdom, faith, and experience don't fade. They sharpen with time. Clarence didn't rebuild his life to prove anyone wrong. He did it to prove that purpose doesn't retire and that self-respect is the foundation of dignity. So if someone doubts you, let your quiet work speak louder than their laughter. Keep building, keep learning, and never let pride steal your peace. Because one day, the same people who dismissed you will come looking for your guidance. If this story spoke to your heart, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about family redemption and the quiet power of wisdom.